Imagine the most expensive street in 1925 Bombay. Not a shadowy alley, but a place of wealth, cars, and colonial order. Now imagine that order being violently, brutally shattered. Tonight's story is just about that. Welcome to Welted Marigold. I'm your storyteller Ambika, and this is the story of Abdul Kadar Baala. But before we get into the story, please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you're listening on a podcast platform, don't forget to follow us there and share it with your friends and family. Also, please do comment and let us know if there's a story you would like for us to cover next, because we are reading your comments. Now, on to the story. A frantic neighbor called for the police. The crime scene is not just bloody, it's an impossible insult. The victim is a high-profile industrialist. The killers, you ask? Well, they are not local thugs. They're the personal guards of a king, sent from an independent state hundreds of miles away. This is the story of how a private obsession became a public execution, forcing the British Empire to choose between protecting a king or upholding the law. And as we go through this story, I want you to ask yourself, did the Maharaja believe his power was truly absolute, or was he deliberately testing the boundaries of the empire? But before we get into the story, let's meet the characters of our story. Tukojirao III, Maharaja of Indore, born 1890, absolute ruler and an obsessive figure. Mumtaz Begum, young dancer and actress, coveted mistress and figure of independence. Abdul Kadar Baala, young businessman, Mumtaz's lover. Shamsuddin, personal secretary to the Maharaja, chief conspirator and agent. Lord Reading, Viceroy of India, political arbiter and upholder of Paramountcy. Our story begins in the sprawling princely state of Indore, ruled by Maharaja Tukojirao III. This was one of the 500 plus territories governed by local kings under the British Raj. These princes were rich, powerful, and in their own lands virtually untouchable. This entire system was called Paramountcy. The British watched, observed, but they rarely interfered. Tukojirao was the ultimate product of this system. Educated in English statecraft, yet raised to believe in his divine right. He was a westernized prince with a medieval core. He resented the British watchdogs, and his private life became his greatest act of defiance. He collected luxury cars, French art, and collected beautiful women. Yes, collected beautiful women, using them as trophies to prove that his word was the law. His palace walls hid a dark secret about him. That was his absolute, unchallenged entitlement. But to understand the Maharaja's extreme nature, we need to understand what happened. Into this king's world stepped Mumtaz Begum, a famed, beautiful, and fiercely independent professional dancer. She was more than just a passing fancy. She became Maharaja's prize, a living symbol of his wealth, taste, and crucially, his unrestricted power. For Maharaja Tukojirao III, possessing Mumtaz was almost like an act of political theatre. He lived under the supervision of the British, who constantly sought to curb his expenditures and influence, showering Mumtaz with jewels, giving her favored status, and bending the conservative court's rules. For her was a way to publicly declare, "This is my private world, and here the British have no authority." For she was like a trophy for him, you see, that reaffirmed his supposed omnipotence. Unlike the other women, you see, who were born into the court, Mumtaz was a professional artist with independent means and renowned outside of the Maharaja's state. She wasn't an inherited possession. She was actually a sovereign artist who had chosen to be with him. Well, only initially. When she realized the palace was like a cage, her choice to leave became not a personal rejection to the Maharaja, but a direct challenge to his divine mandate. The idea that she could unchoose him, the Maharaja, was a threat to his absolute authority, something he had probably never ever experienced before. Mumtaz made the terrifying and, in my opinion, brilliant choice to flee. She didn't just leave Indore. She crossed the border into Bombay presidency. But why? Because Bombay was British territory. It was governed by crown law, not the Maharaja's personal decree. She was smart enough to know that this legal line was her one defense. Her flight turned a domestic dispute into a test of the empire. In Bombay, she found Abdul Kadar Baala, a wealthy, modern man of the city. He offered her partnership and consent, a concept completely foreign to the Maharaja. For Tukojirao, this was more than just a heartbreak. It was an unforgivable act of brazen defiance against the Maharaja. Paala was not just a rival. He was a symbol of the modern free India that the Maharaja completely despised. And so he had to be eliminated. The plan was made. Consumed by rage, the Maharaja didn't hire criminals. He deployed a state-sponsored hit squad. His own officials, armed with weapons, likely from the Indore State Armory. Their mission was simple: eliminate the rival, seize the woman, and disappear back behind the walls of the sovereign state. And then, January 12th, 1925, they ambushed Paola's car on Malabar Hill. Paola fought back, but he was shot dead in the street. The crime was brutal, but the execution had a fatal flaw. A British military officer, Lieutenant C.E. Tobin, happened to drive by. Acting on instinct, he drove his own car into the fray. The assassins panicked. In their frenzy to escape back into the princely protection, they left behind the one thing that broke the Maharaja's shield: a captured assassin and his official Indore state identification papers. This was no ordinary homicide. The murder of Baala on British soil, committed by the Maharaja's own men, was an act of war against the crown's authority. The Viceroy, Lord Reading, knew he faced a crisis. If he allowed a Maharaja to order in his capital, the entire structure of Paramountcy and the British rule crumble entirely. So the British used their ultimate authority, not the handcuffs or a constable, but the power of political coercion. This was an administrative, not a criminal body that meticulously gathered evidence. Mumtaz's brave testimony, financial records, telegrams, and the confessions of the captured assassin. The evidence was irrefutable. The Maharaja personally orchestrated the murder. The investigation became a national obsession. Mumtaz bravely stepped forward as the key witness. The assassin, when caught, offered only one defense: we were following the Maharaja's orders. Now this confession, while failing to acquit them of, became the political smoking gun that convicted the Maharaja. Armed with this undeniable proof, the Viceroy delivered the final chilling ultimatum: give up your throne immediately or face public deposition and disgrace. Maharaja Tukojirao III, the man who believed he was above all, had to concede. And in 1926, he abdicated, trading his sovereign kingdom for a life of wealthy exile on the French Riviera. The Baala murder case became the definitive cautionary story of the Raj, the British Raj. It proved that the Maharaja was too powerful to be jailed outright, but his defiance on British territory gave the crown the perfect, unassailable excuse to strip him of his throne. It was the moment the British proved once and for all that no matter how absolute a prince, a Maharaja, thought his power was, the law of the crown was the final authority in India. This marks the end of this episode. Until the next episode, stay kind, stay safe.